What's the longest that someone's had to wait to get
I knew somebody that
services?
waited 22 years.
22 years?
I'll use my own example with my friend Carrie. So when she moved to Alaska, has Down syndrome. We're friends. We're her legal guardians, but we're not biological family. And we didn't want her to live our lives. We wanted her to have her own life. But she waited for 5.5 years for a waiver to have her own life, her own home, her own.
So what did they do in the meantime? What did she do for those 5.5 years?
We supported her.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is the Director of Hope Community Resources, Michele Girault. Hope is a nonprofit that provides services and supports to people of all ages and abilities who experience intellectual or developmental disabilities, traumatic brain injury, or other mental health challenges. Michele started working there 40 years ago, just after she'd moved to Anchorage. She thought she'd be there a year, but she is still at Hope doing this important work. We will also discuss Friends of Pets. Friends of Pets provides vital animal welfare and protective services for abandoned animals. Our guest serves as the president of Friends of Pets.
Michele Girault, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You are the executive director of Hope
Community Resources. Correct.
Hope Community Resources. Tell us about Hope Community Resources. What is that organization? What do you guys do?
Hope is a Alaska-born nonprofit that supports people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, mental health challenges. We are created with one woman's dream, who started back in the 60s, took in a couple kids that had disabilities into her home. Her name is Nancy Stewart, originally in Fairbanks. And then she moved to Anchorage. And then, like with anybody that's doing good work, oh, Nancy will do that. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon she had 14 kids in her home. And people were rallying around her saying, you need to formalize and create this nonprofit. She rallied with some community members. A board of directors was created. A nonprofit was created called Hope Cottages. And that just was the commencing of this organization now, 55 years later, is serving 6 regions of the state.
And how long have you been with the organization?
This is my 40th year.
40th year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Had a little history there. Yeah, I came for a year and it's lasted a long time.
Let's talk a little bit about you. Where are you from?
Originally from Colorado, and had been invited by a college buddy to come to California to work in a small institution. I was taking a gap year after graduation. I thought, okay, had no experience with people with disabilities, but I fell in love with the work and stayed there for 5 years, and then came to Alaska on vacation, fell in love with Alaska and applied at Hope at the recommendation of a few people. And again, that was my year. I was going to be here for a year. Again, fell in love with the work and have been doing it ever since.
So you thought you'd just be at Hope for a year?
Yeah, establish residency and then go back and get a teaching certificate and move on.
You said that Nancy had, 14 kids in her home when people were like, you've got to formalize this, make this more official.
Right.
How many folks does Hope serve now?
Through the years, it's ebbed and flowed a little bit. Right now, it's about 500 across the state. It had grown about 10 years ago, was probably our height. Originally, there were just a few organizations. There was the Arc of Anchorage and Hope, and regionally, there were some other organizations. But now there's a lot of people in this space.
The burden is being shared.
It's shifted. Yeah. I think for being around for 55 years, we are the longest organization in the state of Alaska with disability services.
What would you say are the biggest barriers to you providing the best service to folks?
Well, I think any social service system seems to be very complicated. Whether you want food, you want housing, you want disability services, there's so many hoops to jump through. And a lot of my career at Hope, we were getting funded with grants, state grants. And although they didn't fund everything that we needed, it was a simpler process. And then because a lot of things get driven by needs for additional income, we went to the Medicaid waiver system, and then we had matches from the federal government. But that process, it's interesting. In the 90s, when that first started and the state went to the Medicaid waiver, it was going to be a 2-page funding document. This was going to be simple. We were told, no big deal, you won't even notice. It within a short order, those funding documents were 20, 25 pages. And a lot of hoops have to be jumped through. And just to give you an example, I have a very good friend who I worked with in California supporting, and we've stayed friends through all the years, had her come to Alaska. She has Down syndrome. You have to prove every few years.
You still have
I still have Down syndrome. And that's true. I still have cerebral palsy. I still have an intellectual disability. So there's a lot of hoops that I feel are unnecessary. Yeah, to showcase what you need.
And that's dealing with the federal government. So it's not necessarily something that a state legislator could fix.
Not necessarily. I think that there can be advocacy on the state level and working with other states with CMS, which is the governing body for the Medicaid implementation, to say, how can we make this simpler? And as an organization, we worked with many people, stakeholders across the state in 2018 to come up with a shared vision for disability services. And the first thing out of the gate is we have a vision of a flexible system that people are not having to jump through all those hoops to say, I just need a little support to be able to do X, Y, and Z.
Let's talk about the types of services that Hope provides and what the typical client would seek out Hope services for.
Sure. I think people knock on the door for a variety of reasons. A parent that has a child with an intellectual disability that's maybe graduating from high school. And it's interesting, in the years that I've been in this space, my peers that have disabilities in Alaska were sent out of state to institutions, and they were brought back in the late 70s and 80s into community. And many just needed a little bit of support in their own apartments. They needed budgeting, cooking support, maybe helping them access transportation, get a job. Others that maybe have more complicated healthcare needs or physical needs need somebody to help get them into the shower and lift them and actually prepare their meals. There's a variety. And then there's people that have behavioral health support needs, mental health needs. I think that we've been trying to provide what is the person knocking on the door or their family to say, this is what we need, and try to tailor that. Now, under the Medicaid umbrella, there's certain categories of support, and they have, we call it alphabet soup, different kinds of names. But to simplify it, it's I need support with residential housing. In my home, these are the supports I need. I need a job. These are the supports I need to maintain a job. I need behavioral health or mental health support. So these are the supports I need. They have all sorts of names, but that's the kind of thing that people come to us looking for. And families at different levels can, because of the child's needs, need a lot more support. Because they have other children, or that particular child's needs they're decompensating and the family decompensates. So sometimes that child actually comes out of that family and then maybe goes into a foster care situation where another person can totally focus on that child's needs.
Let's say that parent comes in and says, my child is graduating from high school and their disability is such that they're going to need residential support, employment support. They're going to need a little bit of everything.
Right.
What do you guys do?
What we do is then we have somebody sit down and say, here's how you can get funding.
Like, do you get assigned like a case manager? Is there somebody who...
We have a new services coordinator. So someone comes in and then they work with a new services coordinator. If they have no funding whatsoever, then we guide them to how they can get funding. And right now, which was what we came and have advocated for the last 30 plus years through the Key Coalition, is people go on a wait list. Mm-hmm. They get qualified for services under certain categories. They have an intellectual disability, they have epilepsy, they have cerebral palsy, or they have autism, qualifiers for the waiver. But then they have to wait for services. And then the state senior disability services manages that. And people get pulled based on need. Sometimes it can be a random or across the state, but generally it's crisis-driven system.
What's the longest that someone's had to wait to get
I knew
services?
Somebody that waited 22 years.
22 years?
I'll use my own example with my friend Carrie. So when she moved to Alaska, has Down syndrome. We're friends. We're her legal guardians, but we're not biological family. And we didn't want her to live our lives. We wanted her to have her own life. But she waited for 5.5 years for a waiver to have her own life, her own home, her own...
So what did they do in the meantime? What did she do for those 5.5 years?
We supported her. We supported her. We private paid for some services. She developed some friendships with other people at Hope, and like they'd invite her over for weekends and things like that. She hung out with me a lot.
My mind is just blown. Like, I was thinking you were going to say that people wait several months and that they have to figure out how to make things work for several months, but years.
I think the average wait is 5 years. Don't quote
Right.
me on that, but it's long. And if you have natural supports, because part of the waiting or the part of the eligibility process is you have to fill out a review sheet, a registry, and it's a deficit-based system. So if you've got a good family and you're able to navigate the world and you're not decompensating or going to API or all the things, you have a really low score and you're low priority. I think there's a balance of that. We can say, surely it's a family's responsibility to raise their children. And you can say that, but I think that there is an obligation from all of us as a community collective to support people that have children with disabilities to be able to thrive and to provide minimal supports. I think early investment has always been the focus, that if you can support a family to have a little bit of service, then they don't decompensate and you have to provide
A lot
lots
of
services. And that's true for a lot of things.
You've had 40 years of experience in this field in Alaska. I'm curious about if the experience that folks with disabilities in Alaska have is similar or different from if they lived in another state.
It's interesting to ask that question because I think comparatively, we have dropped as we have as a state in many categories, where there was a period of time in Alaska where we were one of the premier disability providers. And we had people moving into Alaska to seek out those services. Our education system was good. Our support system was good, but it has eroded over the years. So I think our listing nationwide is in the 40s. So there are other states that do it far better.
So a lot of states do better.
Yeah. And we've had people leave our state saying, I could get better services other places.
Wow. I guess let's talk about state level. And you mentioned the Key Coalition. So can you just explain what is the Key Coalition and how is that different than HOPE?
Sure. COPE is a member of the Key Coalition, and the coalition is made up of providers, the peer power group.
All for folks with disabilities.
Yeah. So you have the primary stakeholder, the person with a disability, their family member, the provider that's providing services, care coordinators that are part of that mix, the staff, the Alaska Alliance of Direct Support Professionals, those providing the service are also part of the coalition because they have skin in that game as well. So it's all of the people coming together and developing advocacy points that are aligned so that we all come to legislators like yourself and you say, okay, what are you all thinking about? And we're all advocating for the same thing.
And again, jumping back to being very specific, if somebody's limitations are mobility impairment such that they really need help in the home all the time, do you guys help set that up, or do you refer to somebody who sets that up? I guess I'm, again, just getting down the nuts and bolts of what's provided and what your specialty is and are you more than just a sort of a referral agency, or do you actually?
We provide, HOPE as an organization has multiple assisted living homes throughout the state. And those are licensed through the state of Alaska. We provide either live-in support or shift staff support. Ideally, people are choosing where they're living. For many years, you had to live in an urban area, and we moved into rural areas. So we were supporting people in Dillingham, and we have a mental health home in Yukiavik. We're no longer in Dillingham just because the healthcare needs of the people living there and the referral to keep the home open started to dry up. But we've gone where people have asked us to go, where families have said, we'd like your help. And we don't want to compete with local folks if there's an organization that's providing that support, but we've gone where people have asked us to go. And I think there are different kinds of paths. So if you today have a disability, but you are able-bodied and still can work, you're referred to an agency that works with people that don't have a developmental or intellectual disability, that they're just working on accessibility or getting you equipment for your home and that kind of thing. And you might have a personal care attendant that comes into your home. When you're in the disability space, the staff that we work with are called direct support professionals. And that kind of distinguishes between somebody who has a developmental or intellectual disability and somebody who just has a physical
So a
disability.
DSP would be for somebody with a developmental.
Correct.
And a PCA would be somebody with mobility only.
Correct.
Yeah, I've misused that acronym.
And it's confusing. Again, it's alphabet soup in so many ways. Like, how do you get services? And it's a confusing system. So people will come to us or call us and say, I have need for housing. So we'll refer them to housing.
Because they don't really qualify for your organization.
Right. I don't have a developmental disability,
Exactly.
but I'm low income and I need help.
Right.
So we still refer
You know where they should go.
Exactly.
Speaking of direct service professional, is that the
Direct support professionals.
direct
Right.
support professionals? And these are folks who work in the home with developmentally disabled people so that they can live in their own home.
Correct.
That's the context in which I know Key Coalition, because you guys came to Juneau and visited offices, and it was a very powerful presentation about the poor compensation for those folks that's resulting in inability to hire those people, inability to keep those people. And what was so moving for me was hearing from these direct
Support professionals.
support professionals.
I think we have tried to be forward thinking through the years to say a direct support professional has a list of skills that they need. They need to be a teacher, a coach, a mentor. They need to have fiscal stewardship. They need to have behavioral health knowledge. They need to have access to community resources. And there's just a lot of things that they need to know. And we've talked and advocated about having our rate structure for reimbursement having the basis on the DSP wage, that it is a living wage.
What is the DSP wage right now?
It varies from organization to organization, but I would say $16, $18 an hour.
So $16 to $18 an hour is not much.
No, and I think the pandemic decimated workforce for many organizations, but for-profit businesses, we all see when we go to a restaurant how much more we're paying for a meal we paid for 3 years ago, and they're raising wages, but they can raise the product cost. We cannot. We only are getting reimbursed at rates 10 years ago, and I think that's been a big factor. And again, we've been a state in distress and financial distress for years, and where we put our investment for extra money has had a lot of competition. And we did have some success last legislative session in terms of the recognition of we do need to look at rate restructuring, and there is a plan to do that. But I keep hearing it's going to take about 5 years. So what happens in those 5 years?
And I think I happen to be working, my office is offering scholarships for lifeguard training. We're trying to get more lifeguards.
The pool open?
Yes.
Yes.
The David C. Anchorage High School pool. That $16 to $18 an hour is a lifeguard wage. Actually, lifeguards are getting paid more in the $18 range. So
Costco, Fred Meyer's, all the things you can easily go out.
And what these direct support professionals are doing is just superhuman in some cases. This is not easy work. Whereas a lifeguard could sit quietly and daydream for a couple of hours. Rescuing people who are drowning is a very important job. I don't want to diminish that, but I'm just saying that my nephew is a 16-year-old lifeguard. He enjoys his time at the pool. It's different than being in the home and assisting in the ways that DSPs are being called on to assist.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of brain power, and it requires focus, and it's the entire day.
I think that sometimes when DSPs are called just a caregiver, I like to think of them as teachers. They're teachers and coaches. And when you think about compensation for teachers and coaches, that also is another conversation in terms of where are we investing our money to support those well. But yeah, it's a heart job. I've seen people, I have a peer at Hope that has been a direct support professional for 40 years.
Wow. And some of them live in the home?
They live in the home.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle.
Or most of them live in the home. I don't know.
I think it varies to agency. We have a lot of live-in staff, and the live-in staff, the compensation also includes your housing, your utilities. We provide a vehicle. So that can be a better wage than maybe the hourly person that's making that $16, $18 and still has this huge rent to pay on the side and food and other things.
Kids to take care of. And I think that's the thing, is that you're taking time away from your own family to give to your client, I mean, I just imagine that happens a lot, that it's not just the DSP who's making sacrifices, but their own families by not having that family member there because they're working at nighttime with a client.
Yeah. I think any service focus, whether you're military or you are a DSP, when you are serving other people, there's always a sacrifice. So it is an investment of heart. And I think we've always tried to be very legal in our staff. And if they're working at night, we're paying them at night. Everyone should be paid. But I think that at the end of the day, we need to create a system where people have the ability to do this work and to support their family, to choose this work and to feel like it's not just the heart, but I'm actually able to thrive in my community as well.
Looking to legislative session, what would be your asks?
I think last year, as I said, we had some wins in the disability space. Mm-hmm. We want that rate restructuring RFP to get out of the gate. It's still not out of the gate, so that we've got somebody working on rate restructuring. Providers, larger providers, are in a very scary space. Many are deficit spending all the reserves to stay afloat because they're so invested in what's going on. The department, SDS, also, there was money allocated to develop a tool to assess.
What does the SDS stand for?
Senior Disability Services. Okay. So that they can have a tool that assesses your needs versus my needs. Because right now, if you and I both live in an assisted living home, we get the same rate. Mm-hmm. So if I have behavioral health needs or mental health needs that require more staff support, the agency's getting paid the same rate
as somebody who has
none of those issues. So we need to be able to assess and have different rate structures for the different needs for people. And that still will spend the money well and be good fiduciary stewards, but again, be more equitable for people. Mm. So that's in play, but still the tool hasn't been purchased and we're not moving forward as quickly as possible. But I think that moving forward, we just need to continue to educate that if we can invest in the upper stream issues, it won't cost us as much because we have been as a state focused on low stream.
Mm-hmm. Like the emergency.
The crisis stuff. Yeah.
When it hits crisis, it's going to cost us more.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the end, the person suffers more than if you could have helped the family here before they decompensated, then it just makes sense.
Can we talk about the adult guardian crisis that's happening? Can you explain a little bit about it?
Sure. Again, I've had many decades of experience. We, as a state of Alaska, have a very high rate of immediately turning to full guardianship for people. You have a disability, you need a guardian. Rather than sitting down with a person and say, do you really need a guardian? Do you need your civil rights taken away? Or do you need people around you that can advise you?
So systemically, we have defaulted towards full guardianship more than we should have. So, and a result of that is that we require a lot more guardians than maybe we should if we were being a little bit more thoughtful about this system.
And I've seen families because of, I don't want to take that responsibility or I don't want to be responsible for the money. Family members that could potentially take it on default and say, let the Office of Public Guardianship take it on. But a few years ago, we really started actively pursuing supported decision-making agreements, which are a legal way for you and I have supporters. We seek out legal advice or we seek out friends and family to say, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And that's just a natural way to do it. But when you have a disability, it can appear that somebody is exerting undue influence on you. So a supported decision-making agreement brings supporters together and creates a legal document that says, I have a legal right to support Michele and give her advice. She has identified me as a friend and tried to move the dial a little bit toward that for people rather than full guardianship. But right now, there is a crisis in our state where so many people don't have the connection to others to have somebody step up and potentially be a partial guardian, or the supported decision-making agreement has not taken off at the level that it could. So we've got way more people needing decision makers.
And I think the recent scandal was knowing that one person could be guardian for so many people. A man was guardian for 100 people, and then he
cash integrity
couldn't be the guardian anymore. And then the office said that they weren't going to take those people on. And so they were just without a guardian. And I think to me, I was like, how could somebody be the guardian for 100 people and be doing a good job?
I think that's a good point. And I think that's what the Office of Public Advocacy has said. Our caseloads are so big, we can't do it. We can't do it well. We're not doing good service when one person, whether it's an OPA guardian or a private business, has hundreds of people. Being a guardian for two people, there was intimacy in their life. There was eyes on all the time. There's financial things. You're dealing with Social Security. You're dealing with employers.
It was a lot of work.
There's a lot of work. And
to do it for two people. Could you have done it for 100?
No.
It seems absurd to me.
No, you can't. You can't. And actually, I'm having a meeting today. There is a group working on alternatives to that and how we can potentially create smaller pockets. Do you have an overriding organization like CASA? You have volunteers with CASA volunteers.
Can you explain what CASA is?
Those are advocates for children that are there. I'm a volunteer, but I'm going to be a volunteer advocate that's appointed for this child. So can we
do something similar
for adults? Yeah, for adults. So that's a potential. Or do you have organizational guardians outside of the state guardianship? Does that work? I've seen it not work several times in Alaska, but it has the possibility of being able to work. So I think the idea is, how do we take care of each other in a better way? Because so many things are broken right now in the disability space.
I can understand that move towards creating a CASA for adults, somebody who's going to keep track, they find out about your story. But if the guardian didn't have 100 people, the guardian had a manageable number of people, then you wouldn't need the CASA there to do the job for the guardian. So we're basically going to be offloading onto volunteers the work that should be the guardian's job. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, more of a diversion to say not a full guardian, but a volunteer.
Oh, so the CASA would prevent the person from needing the guardian in the first place.
Potentially. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, potentially. Because I think many people just need access to, how do I get benefits? How do I maintain those benefits? I can't really maintain my bank account.
Reminding you when this paperwork is due.
Getting to the doctor, making sure you're taking your meds, just some basic things that help people navigate their world.
We've talked about this when we talk about housing and senior housing in particular, that there are seniors who could be independent much longer if they had very mild support, like reminding them to take their medicine every morning, making sure that they have food in their pantry, things like that, that if they don't have family here to do that, if they, for whatever reason, don't have that basically built-in support that a lot of people have, they don't need an assisted living. They don't need around-the-clock nursing care. They really need someone to, did you take your medicine today?
Exactly.
And I think that's something similar that you're looking for with the CASA maybe.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know his name, but there's somebody out there that's dealing with folks that are unhoused and has a small caseload. I'm not sure who's funding him in this moment. I just know what's happening. He's got a small caseload and he actually works with these people and tracks them on the streets and makes sure that they take their meds and things like that, which is keeping them moving forward and thriving. So that idea of how can we create a community where we share some of that care together.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
It's a responsibility to your neighbor. It's a responsibility to your community.
Yeah. And I think asking people, part of that shared vision is that it's person-directed services. Let me direct the services I need. So if you ask a senior, what do you need? I need a reminder. I need somebody to go shopping for me. I need somebody to shovel off my generator so that it'll work because I can't get out. Little things like that. And how we can create paths to help, whether people have a disability or we create housing complexes that have multi-generation, multi-abilities, so that college student next door can help the senior next door, and all of the things that can just build community in a more robust way.
I want to shift topics a little bit. I read an interview that you gave for Alaska Business Monthly for December 2023, and they spotlighted you. It was a very fun interview, I'd say. They focused on your hobbies and your pets. You have 3 dogs, 3 cats.
I do.
And you also do volunteer work in the pet community?
The
I don't know what
animal,
to say.
animal welfare
Animal
community. Yeah,
welfare.
one of my coworkers way back at Hope formed with 3 other women, formed an organization called Friends of Pets. And she said, "Hey, do you want to get involved?" Because I was finding strays on the streets and obviously had a passion for animals. And I'm like, "Sure." So again, 35 years later, still involved in that organization.
Let's go there. I've never featured animal welfare. Tell us a little bit about Friends of Pets and what that organization is.
That, again, just like Hope being created because there was a need for people with disabilities, Friends of Pets was focused on the needs of animal control here in Anchorage. Because at the time, thousands of animals were coming in and thousands were being euthanized. So there was a needs assessment that was done by the municipality, and it was determined that there really needed to be more volunteer engagement at animal control. So Friends of Pets was born. So through the years, we have really focused on showcasing that they're wonderful animals for adoption. We started a spay-neuter assistance program because we needed to reduce the numbers. An education program to really elevate animal welfare. We worked with local decision makers and tried to educate about the first strike in domestic violence is to usually the animal, and developed a safe haven program with Awake and just the education of how we can elevate.
Tell me more about the Safe Haven program with Awake. How does that work?
We provided 2 first strike workshops to the community, and that involved law enforcement, social workers, school personnel, animal control people to really understand that when you're dealing with domestic violence, often the animal is used as a tool.
Kicking the dog. Or
Kick the dog, or the dog is used as, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to kill the dog.
Hurt the dog. Yeah.
And one of the barriers to escaping domestic violence was people not wanting to leave their pets back in that situation. So we have a partnership with Awake that if a woman's coming into the shelter and has pets that need to be housed, we house the pets during their time at the shelter. So that's one burden that's taken away.
How long has that program been going on?
20 years.
Wow. Have you housed pets before?
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I guess about Hope and Friends of Pets, I assume both organizations accept donations.
We aren't too kind. Of course, any nonprofit always does. Yes.
And I don't know how much of the budget are donations.
Hope is a nonprofit entity that's funded primarily through the waiver program.
Mm-hmm.
It's Medicaid driven.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a smaller percentage of philanthropic dollars, but those philanthropic dollars are so important. For instance,
But it's unrestricted.
Yeah.
Whereas you have to make sure that you do everything just by the books. With this. With a donation, you can spend it on what you need that moment.
And I'll give you an example. Legislative connection is that for many years, the legislature did appropriations capital grants, and those have dried up. So when you have all these assisted living homes that you're operating, how do you replace the roof and the driveway and all of the things that you need? So the philanthropic dollars are funding a lot
because the Medicaid waiver money can't be used to replace that roof.
Correct. Yeah. And we've been blessed by foundations such as Rasmussen who've helped with those type of things. But those are philanthropic investments in maintaining.
That might happen this year and might not happen next year.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Friends of Pets, I assume, functions more on donations. And
all donations.
Where does the money go to? The
money goes to our spay-neuter assistance program. We invest a lot of money. If you have a pet and you need a spay-neuter coupon, you just send in a coupon and we give you $100 to get that animal done. It funds rescue and adoption, funds the Safe Haven program. We have a partnership with Providence. So if patients show up in the emergency room and they don't have social support, but they've got a dog beside them or a cat at home, we'll care for that animal. So it helps funds those programs. And we have a rescue and adoption program as well.
Do you feel that Friends of Pets is currently capable of managing? In other words, are you able to shelter all the animals that need to be sheltered?
No.
So you need more people. You need more volunteers.
Yeah, I think foster homes are great. The number of people in distress right now in our community, unable to afford health care for their animals, unable to afford housing, that extra deposit. So there are a lot of animals being released right now. We get calls daily.
If somebody wants to volunteer to be a foster home for pets or to volunteer for Things of Pets in another way, how do they do that?
Website's probably the easiest.
What's the website?
Friendsofpets.org.
Friendsofpets.org.
Yep.
What's the website for Hope?
HopeAlaska.org.
I always ask people to recommend a book. Do you have a book to recommend to our listeners?
The book that I was reading, I was rereading it actually, The House by the Carillion Sea. It's lovely. It has a magical theme of kids that They were in an orphanage, but they all had special needs. It has a disability overlay, but it also has an overlay of how we embrace diversity. And so I'd recommend that to everybody.
Who's it by?
TJ Kalane.
It sounds like a great book.
You'd love it.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
I have dropped the links for Hope and Friends of Pets in the show notes. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com.